Hey guys, today I'm talking about one of the most successful homemade fertilizers, do-it-yourself fertilizers that you can put together in no time. 2 hours, you just mix it, let it sit, and it will turn into a very powerful fertilizer. But I'm going to also show you 3 added ingredients that can help boost it. But before I talk about any of that, I want to go out to the garden and show you some cucumbers that I have put this formula on with and without, and I'll show you a comparison, a visual comparison of how well this works. So let's head out to the vegetable garden and I'll show you exactly how good this works. So guys, the first thing I want to show you is these 4 cucumbers right here growing on the end. I added none of this fertilizer to it. And you can see when compared to the cucumbers further down, these are weak, they're not growing well. Some of them look like they may have disease on them. One of them really looks weak here. And so as we move down, I'll show you exactly, or I'll tell you exactly how much of this formula I put on each one. And it's a surprising result when you look at the one at the end, is how well it grew with a double dose. So let's move down just a little bit. Now I know this is a little hard to see, so I've tried to set the camera where you can get a better visual of it. But these 2 right here were just done with a standard dose of the formula. The one on each side of it were done with a double dose. And you can see this one right here is nearly, I'm hoping you can see this, this is right below 6 feet tall, and this has grown in a matter of days. It has just shot up, and I've had to help the tendrils take a hold of the strings. But the one on each side, these 2 were done with a double dose. These were done with standard dose. Now when you compare that to the 4 on the end that had none of this formula, it makes a huge difference. These on this side of the bed were just done with a standard 1x dose, but the 2 that were doubled have really moved up. So let's go in the greenhouse and I'll show you exactly how to put it together. So there's a couple of rules you have to follow for this to work properly. First of all, you're going to need warm water, not cool water, not hot water, but just warm water, and you need to let it sit overnight, preferably to get the most ideal conditions, although you can make it work in 2 hours. But what you're going to use dry active yeast, 1 tablespoon, and you're going to put that in the water. You don't have to seal the cap. Probably better that you don't, because it could build pressure when it starts this reaction. So you can just set the cap on top of your container and let it sit overnight. If you are in a rush, you can do it in 2 hours, but I would recommend overnight. One thing that I forgot to mention here is you're going to need 2 tablespoons of granulated sugar. Now, the yeast is going to react with the sugar and ferment, and it will produce a nice foamy top, just like a cold beer on a hot day will. This is done yesterday. It foamed early this morning. I still have some foam on the top. I don't know if you can see that too well, but we're going to take that and we're going to mix that in a 5-gallon bucket. Now I've got 3 additional ingredients we can put in there, but you can do this formula with just the yeast and it will work great, the yeast and sugar mixture. But I always like to say, if you can make something better, make it better. So as I showed you before, with just the yeast on the cucumbers, you can see the results in the massive growth. But I'll show you some other things in the garden that have done quite well. But this has a lot of reasons, scientific reasons why it works, and I'll give you just a few. So yeast itself contains minerals, proteins, and lots of organic matter, and that's really something that's going to help the yield and the setting of your fruit as well. So yeast is one of those things that can just boost your plant production, and you would be amazed at how much it will help them. So if you'll just try this one time, I think it will work. But if you do the additives, it can boost it even more. But again, yeast has a lot of positive effects on plant production and fruit production. Now, another thing that very few people know or realize or even talk about is the fact that yeast can prevent pathogenic bacteria from infecting your crops. And so that's one thing that it can do that very few people even know about. So it's good also as a disease preventative and as a fertilizer. Now, sorry, I had a senior moment there. My mind went completely blank. But another thing that yeast can do, and I've done a lot of research on this to find out exactly what is possible with yeast. This is very unknown to me and probably unknown to a lot of people, that yeast can actually help your plant survive drought. So that's one of the things that gardens almost always need. You have to have water and nutrition to make your vegetable garden produce what you need it to produce. And when you have a drought, or if you don't have enough nutrition, you are going to have really big problems producing fruit. So yeast is really a miracle product for your vegetable garden. Next, yeast can help decompose ammonia, phosphorus, and potassium, which makes it available to the plant if it's fixed in the soil. So that's just an amazing thing that yeast can do. And a lot of people don't realize this either, but yeast is actually a fungus. So it's really a miracle product. But I'm going to add 3 additional products at the end of the video and show you how to boost its effectiveness. But if you just want to do the experiment with only yeast and sugar water mixture, then try it that way. But if you'll add these 3 additional products, your vegetable garden will absolutely flourish. But you can use it in other areas, flower gardens and things like that, trees and shrubs. So it's not limited just to the vegetable garden, but you can move around your yard and use it in different areas. But it's just one of the best things you can do for your garden. I'm really kind of disappointed in myself that I didn't make this video much earlier, because it's one of the things I do every year, and it just makes a huge difference in the vegetable garden. Now, lastly, I want to talk about the 2 things that, one is obvious because we've already kind of touched on it, but the last thing you would never think of yeast being able to do. Yeast will help your plant in stressful situations such as lack of water, too much heat, a heat wave, just lots of different situations that often arise in our vegetable gardens. But the last thing that a lot of people would have never thought of a good reason to use yeast is that it will help promote the longevity of your crop once it's picked. So it just makes it almost more shelf stable. It's like you're adding an additive that helps preserve the fruit for a lot longer than if you just picked it, brought it inside. So it just makes the plant much more stable and the fruit last longer on your kitchen counter. Now, I've made videos specifically about these topics. The first one is about eggshells and how to make them completely available to your plants. I'll link that video up above. And it's a few added steps to make that work, but you can just use the egg powder once you've taken the shells and ground them up in your blender, and you can just add that to your yeast product. Also, another thing is I have a fire pit where I burn a lot of limbs and things that fall down during storms, and I've got a 5-gallon bucket that's just completely filled with it, and there's a lot of minerals in that. But if you don't have a fire pit, or if you're in an area that has a burn ban, or maybe you just don't want to do it that way, I'll put a link to this in the description. This is wood ash made from limbs. I believe it was from Tennessee, so it's shipped all over the country. You can buy it online. And the last thing that you can use is Epsom salt. Now, I would say in the mixture, in a quart-size mixture, you can add 1 tablespoon of the wood ash, 1 tablespoon of the egg powder that you've blended, and half a teaspoon of the the Epsom salt. I call it magnesium sulfate because that's what it is, but you can add those to it. But what I'm doing today, I'm just adding just the yeast to the 4 cucumbers because I want to show you later on how well they did if I can remember to do that. So that's one thing to remember. I'm sorry if it looks like I'm melting because we're in the middle of a 100-degree heat wave and I'm in the greenhouse and it is not cooled off in here after all that time. So that's what I'm saying, is that you can use yeast totally alone, or you can use these 3 additional products to help boost its success. Now, what you're going to do, once you've mixed up a quart, you're going to take a 5-gallon bucket, fill it almost to the top, and then add your quart mixture. But you don't want the tap water to be cold. You want the water to be room temperature. So fill the bucket up, wait a few hours, and because I know that my ground water that comes out of the ground is quite cold. So we want the water to be either room temperature or even on the slightly warm side. So you could put it out in the sun on a warm day and warm your water up a little bit. So add that 1 quart mixture, just the yeast and water. Once it's fermented overnight, or a minimum of 2 hours, add it to your 5-gallon bucket, and then we'll go out and treat the cucumbers. And I'll show you a few other things in the garden that's done extremely well with just this mixture, not the additives, but just the yeast mixture. Now, I want to give you one quick tip before we head out to the garden about using a fire pit to collect ash. The way you do this is you want to collect your ash before it gets wet. Once it's rained on, those minerals go back into the soil. So collect it, put it in a 5-gallon bucket, store it somewhere where it stays dry, because once it rains, it's just not as productive for your garden. It doesn't contain the same level of minerals. So just remember, if you decide to do the ash and you want to create your own ash for your mixtures, make sure you collect it before a rain. So here are our 4 cucumber plants that seem to be struggling quite a bit. It looks like there is disease on some of them. Looks like they're suffering under the extreme heat we're having, the heat wave this came through, maybe a little bit of sun scorch. So that's another thing that I mentioned earlier, is that you can protect it against all these stressful situations by adding this, not only in the initial stages, where if you're planting seedlings, you can also do it once the plant's established. I would say about once every 2 weeks, you can do this to help boost your garden. I wouldn't do it every week, but I'd say about every 2 weeks you can do that, and it will help quite a bit. We've got our mixture here, or our 1 quart. We're going to mix it with our water that's not been sitting in the sun. It's been sitting in the shade on a 97-degree day. So it's warm, it's not cold. So that will help as well, so we can get that fungus, that bacteria in there growing in the ground, and it will help our plants. So we'll mix that real quick. And I don't have my stir stick handy, so I'm going to have to use our stir stick, one of our paint sticks that we use to label the garden. So I'm just going to stir that around. And that's another great use for paint sticks, is you can write whatever you have, use it for more than 1 year. It'll last for a few years. But we're going to do this first. And I'm going to say about 1 cup per plant should do it. I don't think I would do more than that. And you can also do a double strength mixture. As I said earlier, just use less water and make it a little bit stronger. So I don't have my measuring cup handy right now, but I'm going to guess that's about 1 cup. And we're going to add this to 1 cup to each plant, help get them a little bit healthier looking than they are now. And I'm going to go around the garden and use this on everything: tomatoes, cucumbers, squash, peppers, anything I got growing out here vegetable wise. I'm going to put 1 cup on each plant to help them. Another thing is, if you wanted to do a very slow watering schedule, you can take a gallon sized watering jug, put a very small pinhole in it, maybe use a needle or maybe a very fine drill bit, 1/16 or smaller drill bit, and just put maybe 1 in between each plant and let it slowly water out each side. And that way it's not just a huge amount of water where a lot of it may not get into the soil, as well as if it's a slow watering thing. That's what I like doing with all my irrigation. I have some small irrigation lines that just gives it just a little bit of water, and it's not this huge deluge of water. So that's another thing you can do with these gallon jugs, is you can just put the pinholes, fill it up with your yeast solution, and let it slowly water over a period of 1 hour or longer. So guys, these are our tomatoes. We have different varieties, everything from cherries to the very large tomatoes. And it has produced so many tomatoes already. I'm actually about 3 to 4 weeks behind on my garden this year. I was so busy. But as you can see, there are tomatoes all over the vines, and that I attribute to the yeast formula. And I'll also show you some other plants in the bed right next to it. Now, these eggplants I treated about 3 to 4 weeks ago, and they have quadrupled in size, and they've already started to produce a lot of eggplant. This is Japanese eggplant, to be exact. I think it's Ichiban. And it was picked up at Walmart, which is, we got the last, I think it was 5 plants they had on the shelf. So these are a little bit harder to find, but we like them a lot better than the standard eggplant. But they have quadrupled in size once we did this mixture formula on them. Now, these are Japanese sweet pepper, and they have just produced like crazy. Once we did the formula mixture on them, they just started putting out flowers, and they started turning into these small sweet peppers that are from Japan, and they are quite good in a salad. So it works well on peppers, everything you can imagine in the garden. Try it, and I think you'll be very happy. If you add the 3 additional ingredients to it, I think you'll see it even better. I'll put a link to another thing that I made a video about called biochar. I'll put that link up above as well. But again, doing things for the soil, that's where the life is in your garden. You've got to do that. You've got to think about that first, so you'll have a bountiful harvest, and you'll have more vegetables than you can eat, and even the people who you give them to, you'll have more than you can possibly deal with. Now, another thing I don't want to fail to mention is the importance of foliar feeding. It can be as important as watering at the base of the plant. With this formula, with just the yeast, you can foliar feed your plant, and that will help it as well. It won't hurt it at all. So just do some foliar feeding. Sounds like a wounded goose here with this thing, but you can go around your garden and do foliar feeding as well as watering at the base with your 1 cup of the yeast solution. Now, this dry yeast, I keep it in the fridge, and it will last for quite a long while. Even if it's expired, it's still okay to use it because I've kept it refrigerated and it's been in a nice, cool environment. But if you're using fresh yeast, it will be even more potent. So if you can get some fresh yeast, that's even better. I looked online, I looked a lot of different places, and the prices for the fresh yeast was a little bit high. I'll link one down below. But if you want to use fresh yeast rather than the dry yeast like this, and there's nothing wrong either way, but the fresh yeast may even be more potent and work even better than dry yeast. So guys, I want to say thanks so much for watching. I'm always trying to find ways to improve my vegetable garden as well as my ornamental gardens. And this is probably one thing that I should have done a long time ago, as I mentioned earlier, as far as a video form, because it really does help your vegetable garden. And I've tried it here and there in the ornamental garden, but it does pretty well without any of the dry yeast. But if you're growing vegetables and you want a massive harvest, this is a trick you need to try. So thanks so much for watching and have a great day.